some potential impacts or what the status of the potential impacts to the Gold Hill intake would be in the city of Gold Hill as part of the Gold Ray Dam little project would be. So with me I have Scott Wright. Scott Wright is what we term the engineer of record. He's the engineer who is stamping the plans and certifying that everything is being done according to proper engineering protocols and legal laws as necessary.
Mr. Wright, can I get the spelling on John's last name?
My name is spelled Vile. V as in Victor, I-A-L. And Scott Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T.
Thank you. Thank you.
What I'll do is I'll just give a little brief presentation regarding a short history and where the project is at with the county, and then Mr. Wright will cover the sediment transport issues, and contamination, and the sorts of things that Elise indicated specifically wanted to go into. Can you get the lights? Good.
I'm going to see if we can de-lamp.
That'll work.
Yeah.
You have to go get that?
That's
That
the
one?
contrast, yeah.
So the Gold Hill Dam removal project is really the project to remove two dams. The original dam was built in 1904 and it was comprised of a timber crib dam, which is built immediately upstream of the current existing concrete dam. It was built for the purpose of generating hydroelectric power. In this photo that was taken about 6 years after completion, you can see the powerhouse on the left-hand side, the forebay and the tail race, and the timber crib dam in place, and is operating to produce hydroelectric power, which is its intended purpose. The timber crib dam is a fairly simple dam. It's just stacked logs when they place the concrete and boulders, tie things together, and basically tie a set of timber logs together to create a dam across the river. And the majority of it is still in place. It leaked a lot, and they also wanted to raise the elevation of the dam to increase the energy output of the site. So in 1941, Hopco embarked on a project to build a concrete dam downstream. This slab and buttress kind of a design where basically it's concrete slabs laid at about a 45-degree angle on some uprights that hold those things up. Basically what we received in 1972 from Pacific Power is essentially what's there today. The timber crib dam is located immediately upstream of the concrete dam. You can see it there. There's two fish ladders, a primary fish ladder and a secondary fish ladder. The powerhouse, forebay, the tail race. About the only thing that's changed is on the left-hand side of the photograph, there's a pair of residents. Those residents are gone now. Other than that, most of it is still the same as it was when we got it in 1972. This site has been a difficult site for the county to manage. There's been lots of vandalism, and there's a lot of liability issues. The powerhouse, which has been partially removed, this stood here a few weeks ago, but the powerhouse, the floors in it were rotten, and there was holes in it, and it was a dangerous facility to be in. Most all the copper in the entire building was stripped out by those with substance abuse problems, and it suffered a lot of vandalism. The structure itself, many parts of the structure, especially this mortar and stone wall that is on the left-hand side of your photograph, and as well as many other aspects of the project, were built in 1904. And structures such as this are not designed to last forever. They have a given life, just like a bridge has a given life. Those structures need routine maintenance and they need repairs, and things do not last forever. And this site is showing its age, and there are necessary repairs that need to be made to it. One of the biggest challenges the county has is we are on notice from the regulatory agencies that we have a problem with the fish ladder. I'm not a fish biologist. I'm not going to argue whether that's a valid concern or not. All I can tell you is that we received notice from the Department of Fish and Wildlife that Gold Ray Dam constituted the fifth largest impediment to fish passage in the state of Oregon, and that we were required to start addressing that concerns, and if we didn't address those concerns, there's potential enforcement action that would be forthcoming. And so the county is on notice that we have a problem site that we need to address. And the last item is the dam itself is a hazard, and hanging up logs and dealing with drift. And this was a couple of years ago when we had a drift problem accumulate on the dam. We had to bring in Erickson airframe to come remove the log from the dam this time, and it does get significantly worse. In '97 was the worst one in the last several years, where a good portion of the dam was completely choked with debris. We had to bring in logging companies to remove it. So before the Board of Commissioners made a decision, they asked that several things be studied and disclosed to them before they made a decision to remove this dam. The first item was the sediment. We didn't know how much sediment was behind that dam, what was in the sediment, and where it was going. And that was a huge issue with this project, where the county may have chosen to not do the project, depending on the results of those studies. If the entire area behind the dam was filled full of fine material, clays and silts and such, and we had to dig all that stuff up, truck it off-site and remove it, clearly that was going to be cost prohibitive. It would kill the project and would make it so we couldn't proceed with the project. So what's in the sediment, how much is there, and who's it going to impact and where it's going is a big question that had to be answered. Mr. Ryan's going to be spending a considerable portion of his presentation talking about that issue for you. Another question that was really raised by the public as we started into it was, can the dam be rehabilitated to produce hydroelectric power? So that was another question that we wanted to answer as we went through this process. One of the concerns was the wetlands behind the dam and what would be required by the regulatory agencies to mitigate an impact of those wetlands. There's a large area behind the dam that many people consider to be jurisdictional wetlands. The studies have shown that it's a fairly small percentage of that area. But if we were going to be required to mitigate all that, again, that would have been a very big challenge for the county to go find a site large enough to mitigate that. So that would have had a consequence to maybe not to move forward. And then what are the pros and cons of the dam? It's basically of dam removal. What are the net gains and net consequences of going forward with that action? They wanted a summary of that. And that was largely done through the environmental assessment process. So before we began work, the board expected to have a completed environmental assessment, which is part of the NEPA process, a finding of no significant impact, which concludes the NEPA process in this case, and then all the permits. So why did the board vote to remove this dam? This is a board that has gone on record. In fact, this is a board that is extremely aggressive trying to stop the removal and notching of the Elk Creek Dam. This is a board that's gone on record and is opposed to Savage Rapids Dam removal, and this is a board that doesn't care for what's going on in the Klamath Basin. So why are they supporting this dam? And really when it comes down to it, it's an issue of cost and liability. This dam serves no direct intended purpose. It's a spillover dam. Every drop of water that enters the dam above the dam goes over the top of the dam. So you cannot use it for flood control, and it provides no flood control for the river at all. It does not provide any power generation. It hasn't done so since 1972. And it's not a facility that's used for irrigation. There's no irrigation ditches or irrigation facilities coming off of it. Now, the biggest benefit is there are some limited recreation values that are behind the dam, but other than that, it doesn't serve any of its intended purpose. As I noted, the county needs to invest in facilities. Facilities do not last forever, and they need regular investment to stay in place. We have invested very little in terms of maintenance and repair of the facility since we obtained it in 1972. And the cost to rehabilitate the dam and the retaining walls and the other structures out there is about $12 million. $11.9 million is the estimate to rehabilitate it. The fish ladder improvements would cost about $4 million to do. The powerhouse is deteriorating. Unfortunately, it's gone now. Vandalism and security problems are big there. I talked about the drift removal and the log jams. And it's a very difficult area to secure in terms of being an attractive area for people to get injured at. Boats have gone over the dam before. It's very attractive as far as being on the site, and it's a real liability issue for the county. So where the county's at now is we have to invest in the facility. Doing nothing is not a course of action that we continue to do any longer. Just basically ignoring it as we've done for several years now. So we're in a position now to where we either have to invest in it, and as I've noted, investing in it's going to cost the neighborhood of $16 million to keep it, and then it's going to require additional investment over time, or we can remove it, and the cost of removal is a little less than $6 million. So the Board of Commissioners has voted to remove it. The project is fully funded. We received a $5 million grant from NOAA to remove the dam, and a $1 million grant from OWEB, Oregon Watershed Management Board. So we have enough money to remove it. On May 5th, the Board of Commissioners voted to remove the dam. The EA, the finding of no significant impact, the permits have been obtained by June 15th. We started construction on June 15th, and since that time period, it's been kind of an on again, off again due to legal challenges. Opponents to this have been successful in several avenues of stopping the work for a period of time. And the latest hearing was today, and we expect a ruling tomorrow or the next day from Judge Panner on that particular stoppage right now. And then that will dictate what the next steps the county takes. What these studies have all shown, and Scott Wright will go through it in more detail, is other than some short-term turbidity impacts that occur when we reach the coffer dam that's holding back the river, that other than those short-term turbidity impacts, which would be similar to a winter storm, that there's no identified impacts to the city of Gold Hill to this project. And I think with that, what I'm going to do is turn it over to Scott, and then when he's done, we can take questions that you have. So,
the record will reflect Councilor Sola, slowly, 46.
So thanks for having us in, and it's a pleasure to be back to the city of Gold Hill. We actually, my company actually did the Gold Hill dam removal, so it's kind of nice to come back and see how that has been doing, and I completely keep an eye on that. And so it's nice to get a chance to come back to the city council here and talk about this project as well, since we're very familiar with the stretch of the river, having worked on it 2 years ago to remove the Gold Hill dam. Many of the same issues that the city of Gold Hill is struggling with, basically your water intake and fish passage and things like that with Gold Hill. Jackson County is also struggling with the same thing. They've got this piece of infrastructure that doesn't meet the current fish passage guidelines, and so now it's something that they have to deal with, similar to what the city of Gold Hill. I believe the Gold Hill Dam was the #2 fish passage barrier in the state, and the Gold Ray was #5, so, and Savage Rapids was #1. So you can see the progression here as far as trying to deal with these issues from a fish passage standpoint. So it's interesting to be able to work on all of these different projects and have that continuity. Just for most of you, you're probably aware of this or know where we're located here, obviously, but to give you some context for location of the Savage Rapids Dam, if that's brought up, is downstream of the City of Gold River, and then we have the Gold Hill Dam that's no longer there where the water intake is at today, and then we have Gold Ray further upstream. The kind of interesting thing that I want to point out in this picture is that you look at this and you see a lot of relief and pretty much a gorge type geology for the Rogue River once it comes past Gold Ray Dam. So if you are familiar enough with the area, and you should be, I'm sure, but upstream of Gold Ray Dam, it's pretty flat and there's a lot of floodplains up above Table Rock upstream of there. Once you get past Gold Ray, it gets into a pretty confined valley, and you have really high banks and a lot of bedrock, as you can see right here by the city. And so that's what the Gold Hill Dam looked like before it was taken out. And one of the things, the precursors to that coming out, was the water intake was installed upstream. This is where the water intake is located, and that was actually studied by the Bureau of Reclamation. They came in and did a multi-phase, it's a 2-phase study, where they looked at how do we deal with fish passage at the Gold Hill Dam, and then also how do we deal with the city's water source as well. And so they did a multi-year study and came up with a decision on the best place to locate a water intake structure to do 2 things. One is minimize costs, and 2 is to minimize long-term impacts from sediment and maintenance down the road. And so where it was designed and built is the location that was recommended by the Bureau of Reclamation. I'm very familiar with the water intake because I had to live with the legacy of the water intake. It had a significant DEQ fine that was put against it for a violation when they built the coffer dam around when they were building the water intake. And so when we did the Goldfield Dam removal, we had to be held to a higher standard basically because of that, what happened on the water intake. And so I'm very familiar with kind of the history and the background of that. We do have the drawings and information from the water intake structure as well. So this is the architectural drawings, just showing the existing bed of the stream. It's a little hard to see where you're at, but this is the existing bed of the stream. And this is where they actually went in and lowered it and put concrete down in the bed of the river, and then built the water intake structure there. This is just the site plan, the civil plan, and then we have the structural plans as well, showing the concrete, how the concrete was placed, and the elevations that it was placed at. So that's kind of the real quick background on my understanding of the Gold Hill water intake, and then I want to just describe quickly kind of the studies and information that we went through on the Gold Ray Dam project. As John said, we did an environmental assessment that addressed kind of the economical, social, and environmental impacts of the different alternatives that we were studying. The three alternatives were dam removal. The second alternative was to rehabilitate the dam with hydropower, and then the third was no action at all. And as John showed you earlier, this is just a picture showing the Gold Ray Dam and kind of describing the different features of the dam. One of the things too that was talked about a lot and has been brought up by a lot of people is the wetlands. And so I just wanted to real quickly talk about the wetlands upstream of that. And there's specific protocols for dealing with wetlands, and we followed all protocols for that. We identified that there was only about 16% of that 528-acre area was wetlands. And so you can see on the screen there the actual areas that we demarked as wetlands, and this was also approved by the Army Corps and Division of State Lands as a determination on where wetlands are located upstream of the existing dam.
So what color there is actually wetland?
Actually, it's all the colors. So if you see anything that's in color, that's a wetland. So the blue, the orange, there are different varieties of wetland, like one's an ash forest, one's aquatic plants, different variations. You see the vegetation here, that's not wetland. And so they did not qualify as jurisdictional wetlands.
Can I ask what time of year that was studied?
Sure, it was done. There's very specific protocols for wetlands. They have to meet three characteristics. One is hydrophytic vegetation, two is the hydric soils, and then three is the hydrology. And you have to do the hydrology, has to be within the growing period of when plants would typically grow. And so this study was done in May, and that's a pretty good time to look at May or earlier, I believe. And that's a decent time to be looking at the different characteristics out there for plants. So it's a good question, though, because plants are pretty hard to key out at different times
Well,
of
it
year.
depends on water flow and...
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So the other thing too, that the reason why a lot of this doesn't qualify as wetlands, because there's a lot of blackberries, and blackberries are not wetland plants. They grow around rivers and streams, as we all know, but they're not necessarily an indicator of wetlands. The other thing too is it doesn't meet the soils criteria for the right type of soils, the hydric soils. So in most cases out there in the reservoir area, there's two things that don't meet wetland requirements. The hydrology's there, obviously, the water's there, but not necessarily the plant communities.
So does that mean maybe the blackberries choke the plant communities out?
Probably, yeah.
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 Because when I was a kid, that was, I mean, you couldn't get out the further.
Absolutely. So that's a good example of when you were a kid, probably what it looked like, more like this here, where there was weeds or the sloughs and everything all over the place. And so as a result, what's happened over the years is that's filled in, slowly silted in, and then plants grow on top of that silt, become more established, then it gets completely filled in. So The idea that this is a static environment or it stays the same is totally fallacious. It's not true. What happens is if nothing is done, the wetlands will continue to shrink and shrink and shrink because they're being filled in. And so your experience shows that pretty clearly, just in seeing what's happening.
I guess it occurs to me that the Bureau of Reclamation should perhaps go in there and reclaim the wetlands.
Bureau of Reclamation doesn't have anything to do with wetlands. So the regulatory agencies that deal with wetlands are primarily the Army Corps of Engineers and the Division of State Lands at the state level. And so these are artificial wetlands due to the dams being put in there. So they're not natural wetlands that were there necessarily before. So
It's been that long.
Yeah,
The dam's been there.
right.
That doesn't make them natural at this point.
Well, they are natural, yes, and they are jurisdictional, yes. So
Now
they're
now we're
covered.
beating words up.
They're not very helpful. What about, is the criteria for wetlands for bird habitation?
No,
No?
No.
I mean, is that the reason that they're important is because birds, migratory birds, go
sure.
there and they don't differentiate between whether or not it's a natural wetlands or an artificial wetland, and they might just become there?
Absolutely. So
Okay,
that wildlife is a benefit of wetlands,
Mhm.
wildlife habitat, for sure. Reptiles, amphibians, the whole gamut, more than just birds. But the problem is that they're only identified from a regulatory agency by the soil types, the water, hydrology, and in the actual plant community. So they don't really take into account birds and reptiles and other,
Does it have to meet all three criteria
Yes.
or just
Well,
all three.
all three?
Yep.
when you use the word have to, this is, it's a man-made construct.
Right.
Whether or not it has to or not, the birds aren't gonna be notified that these wetlands aren't gonna be here anymore, but maybe they are gonna be. But what it appears to me is that these standards can be arbitrarily applied whether or not the government wants the project. That's what it looks like to me. That the standards, that they're important if the government is trying to stop somebody from doing something. And if it's their own project, they become rapidly very unimportant, the birds, the reptiles.
Yeah, I don't want to go down that path, but they absolutely, positively are not arbitrary. They are very specific, and that's what there are manuals, like the Natural Resources Conservation Service has a manual on soil, identifying soil types. But the Army Corps has a field manual that everybody has to follow for wetlands. And it's not really a gray area, it's pretty cut and dry. And that's why they don't take into account animals and amphibians and other things. They look at three specific things: the vegetation, soils, and water, and that's it. So I was just giving you a little bit of background because everybody says, what about all the wetlands upstream of the dam? And technically there's not much wetland up.
So is there like 50 acres out of the 500?
16% of the 528, so
So what
you
is
can-
that?
that's about,
50,
it's more, a little bit more than 50, about probably 75,
75, yeah. probably
between 75 and 100. But if you look, this 528 acre site is this red line. So we delineated this whole area along the river here as well. So that's all 528 acres, and only 16% of that essentially is the wetland area.
So what's going to happen to, like, I see it like towards the bottom, or actually right in the middle where the green is going through. So let's just say that that's just one little finger of wetlands throughout there.
Right.
Where most of the wetlands is agglomerated more towards the front
Right.
and down.
So you see a lot of wetland here, and you're talking about there's a finger
Yeah,
here.
like that finger
What's going to
there.
happen to that?
Yeah, what's going to happen to that?
So the elevation up here, the upstream end, there's a historical channel, old channel that goes through here where the river used to flow. And the elevation up there will be very similar once the dam is out.
Very similar or similar?
Similar.
See, I gotta get those words out.
Okay. It's going to be similar. And what will happen under high flow events, you'll still get water all across this area. And so we will still see water in here and ponding and water being collected in here during a high flow event. There is also, like in the summer, when the water is down and all of the water is consolidated into this channel, you'll still have seepage that comes in from Table Rock and other valleys up here that will likely keep a lot of this marine area still alive. And And so you're gonna see this change in complexion, but it will still have areas of wetlands that'll still be available for.
So what is that land going to become? I mean, is it
It's a
going to
park.
It's going to become a park?
Yep. Yep, so Jackson County
State
owns it.
park, county park?
The county owns it, and they will be working on a master plan for their park, and.
But they don't have a clue what they're gonna do with it now.
I don't know if that's
We'll
true.
put the cart before the horse and the horse before the cart.
It's gonna be managed in the short term exactly like it's been managed today. It's open space
Nothing.
and
Nothing.
nothing.
Yeah, please explain a high flow event.
Sure.
Is that during the winter time? And
Yeah.
the snow event, so that's only
Yeah.
across the town here, right?
Yeah, yeah. Basically, when their water turns brown, it's a high flow event.
Which is not very long.
Right.
We have a protocol in place when there's this overflow of sewage at Eagle Point. So I see the county right now has a protocol in place to inform us that you're putting stuff in the river so that we don't draw drinking water. You do? You have a written protocol in place right now. If you'd have taken out the dam a couple of weeks ago, if this lawsuit wasn't stopping you right now, you have a written protocol in place to notify us that there's stuff in the river so we don't draw our drinking water out of it.
Well, there's no sewage in there. I mean,
Right.
we have a notice.
It's clean water.
I know it's not sewage, I know it's the stuff behind, the stuff you guys have to test,
I'm
Yes.
just worried about the heavy metals and stuff that's been back there, held back there.
We're gonna get to that. But as far as a notification process, yes, when we're working and the river's gonna get cloudy and we're having an impact, and we are informing the downstream property owners that, during this time period, then these things will happen, and the city of Gold Hill is one of those people that we're notifying.
So could you give us that written protocol so that we know that it's in existence? Who's the contact person?
Sure. So, hold on. So the Rogue Valley Council of Governments website is an existing website that has the protocol actually for notification of how things will be handled.
Here's the thing about that. You see here where it says here that the Rogue Valley Council of Governments participated in multiple meetings with specific stakeholders such as neighboring property owners, historical societies, civic groups, fishing and boating groups during the EA preparations. Gold Hill wasn't ever included in this. They never notified us. They never had a meeting. We have 1,000 people in this town that are immediate stakeholders that get their drinking water out of that river, and the Rogue Valley Council of Governments, they haven't been through here. I don't know that that's really an adequate thing to say that if we want to know, we can go to their website,
Well, on their website,
them to do this.
on their website, there's a very specific communication protocol on how communications will be handled. And so if you're interested in a written document signed by me, knowing who to call and where to call, that's on the website.
You see now that,
interested?
the city of Gold Hill will be notified that we have been notified
Up
in
to
the
this
past,
point.
until this point. So,
Actually, all newsletters for the project have been sent to the city. The Fonzie was sent to the city. The documents related to this project have been sent to the city, and you have been notified of these things all throughout this planning process. Now, has the Rogue Valley Council of Governments come out and met with you individually in a study session like this? I'm not going to say they have, because I don't know if they have. But as far as the notices of the project, the newsletters and other things, they have been sent to the city.
If we change the zone in this city, and we suddenly affect Mr. Blake's property, because we're gonna change that zone, we're gonna allow dog kennels in that zone, we have to notify each property owner that they may be adversely affected. So for me to be told that I can go to the newsletter from COG, and by the way, since you were out here for the water intake and you'd like to know how we're doing, we're being sued right now for our water intake. All of our reserve money in both our water and our sewer funds right now, we're paying defense, we're paying for an attorney to help us get through this other project, which we were all in together. We don't necessarily, COG, our good friend COG, who got the administrative fees for administering that grant and who facilitated and pushed it forward, they aren't helping us pay those attorney fees right now. And they do know that that our intake is there, that intake was not, can you tell me whether or not the intake was built to take in the removal of that they were taking into consideration the removal of this dam? This larger dam now?
I can tell you how they cited the water intake, and I can tell you about how water intakes perform.
Okay, can you tell me whether or not they were factoring in the removal of this dam? Because just a common layperson would think that the road, is it OWEB and the road basin project, that is the driving force, they go down the river, they
Hold on
find
for just a
things
sec,
like
because,
Salmonella.
hold on for just a second. You're pulling a bunch of different things into the fight here, and we're trying to just give you an update and try and talk about the water intake. And you're talking about 3 or 4 different projects that we have nothing to do with.
Well, wait a second, what I'm saying is since they mapped all these obstacles to the fish, right?
Okay.
Wasn't that the road basin and OF working, and then they go to the federal government and they tell that we're hurting the fish. Then the federal comes back and tells, and all of a sudden they know about that dam, and they know about this dam, and they're hurt. And so don't you think that somebody maybe should have done it in order? If you were gonna take out this dam, this larger dam, that the siting of our intake should have been taken into, now I realize you're with the county, so you're not really in that food chain. You know, you're not really responsible for the fact that they came here and did this leg of the project, and then they moved upstream to do that. And nobody's gonna guarantee us that there's gonna be water at our intake, are they? You're not. Are you?
Mr. Chair, would you like us to go through the presentation? I think a lot of the questions that you're asking will be answered through the presentation, or do you want us to go ahead and just take questions now? Okay.
Well, it's not clear if we got the information and then have questions instead of bouncing around.
From what I've been made aware of, is that this is like a multiple personality of the impact itself.
Okay.
Why don't we just address potential adverse economic impacts would include loss of water supply, generally domestic use for downstream water intakes and several upstream wells. That's what we're concerned about, and also toxic waste. But primarily, this is what we're concerned about.
There's a sediment study done.
And that's, I mean, if we could, we could walk you through all these things and answer, I think, a lot of these questions.
So there was a hydraulic model completed. The Bureau of Reclamation did a hydraulic model for the Goldfield dam removal that started at Gold Nugget Rapid and went down to the below Powerhouse Rapids. That model looked at the influence of the Goldfield dam and how it trapped sediment or did not trap sediment. And in this case, the Goldfield dam, when it was in place, was a small dam, but it did not trap any sediment. There was sediment coming through the river because when you look at the Gold Ray Dam, there's not sediment piled up to the top of that dam. It's about 20 to 30 feet deep behind the dam, demonstrating the sediment is still going through the system. Now the reservoir has filled in. It's filled in with a lot of gravels, but then also a lot of fine silts. Based on your experience, Donna, it's an example of the silts dropping out in the wetland area upstream of the reservoir. And so material sediment is still coming through, but yet it's not being trapped upstream of the Goldfield Dam. And then when that dam was taken out, that even improved things even better. And when you go out and look at your water intake structure, it's sitting on bedrock. And there are big veins of bedrock sitting all around your intake structure. It's an excellent location for water intake because what do we know about bedrock? It doesn't move. And it's got an area of really high velocities. And so when you have a flood, which typically that's when sediment moves, the velocities sweep that sediment completely off of the rocks and keep it away from the rocks because it's a zone of high velocity. That's what I was referring to as far as how you design the proper design of a water intake structure is you look for areas of high velocity, because that ensures that it stays scoured. The Bureau of Reclamation did that. They looked at 5 different locations for your water intake structure, including in the canal and upstream of the dam and further upstream of the dam where it's located. They came and arrived at a decision to put it where it's located today because that was the best conditions from an economic standpoint and then also as a result of minimizing maintenance. Because they knew when they looked at it that sediment's coming through the system. And what happens if the Gold Ray Dam is removed, there will be a slug of sediment that goes through the system that'll be higher than natural background levels, but are very much within the context of what the river can move. And so it is not likely that your water intake will be filled in with sediment. And that's one of the things that we had to do is look at what's going to happen with this sediment that's upstream of the dam. Is it going to go down and park in front of all these houses, Gold Ray Estates 1 and 2, that have a lot of water intakes if you've been through there. And so we did a pretty thorough hydraulic model with up-to-date information. This is a HEC-RAS model, which is just a standard hydraulic modeling software where we can predict velocities, and we can predict shear stresses, and we can predict sediment transport and what will happen to sediment. And then this is showing the floodplain. And as you can see, this is downstream. The Gold Ray Dam is located here, the reservoir up here. All these green dots basically are homes. And each one of these homes, or the majority of these homes, have some kind of irrigation access or domestic use access that goes down to the river here. And this was a pretty big concern, obviously, if you're releasing this sediment from upstream in the reservoir, this gravel, is it going to go down and clog up? And what we found is that the answer is no, it's not. What the modeling, the hydraulic modeling does, it's not an exact science. You don't plug in a bunch of numbers and get an exact answer of exactly what's going to happen. So what it looks for, what we look for in the hydraulic modeling is trends and trajectories. Where is the river headed once this sediment starts to move through the system? And this is where I try to point out to you at the very beginning, where I showed you that the reservoir area upstream has a very wide floodplain. It's really expansive up there. And then it gets necked down into a very small floodplain. And you know, just like a freeway, if you have a 10-lane freeway and you go to a 2-lane freeway, what has to happen if you want the same amount of traffic to go through? The cars have to go faster, right? And so that's essentially what we're doing with the river is we've got a really wide area for high flow events, and then we neck it down, and the flow can't change because we're not regulating the flow here. They might be doing that at Lost Creek, but we're not doing that here. So with the dam gone, and even with the dam there today, what you see is very high velocities in this area downstream. So what I'm showing you is a velocity profile here and then through here. And what happens is the velocities up in the reservoir for like a 100-year event are on the order of 8 feet per second or less in the reservoir area. When they get into this confined valley that we have here at Gold Hill all the way up to Gold Ray, essentially, the velocities are in the range of 12, even up to 15, 16 feet per second. So a particle or a piece of sediment that gets mobilized in a storm event up here was mobilized by an event that was about 6 feet per second for a velocity. And once it gets into here, it is really ripping through there, and it doesn't have the opportunity to drop out or settle out. And so if you've been up and down the Rogue River very much, you know that there's not a lot of big gravel bars all over the place. There are some, but they're very specific locations. And so if you go from here to all the way out through the Wild and Scenic, you don't find a lot of gravel bars. There's some exceptions to that, like the confluence of the Applegate, where it comes in at White Horse Park. There's gravel everywhere there. And that's one of the biggest gravel deposit areas there is. But for the most part, we don't have that many along here. We have a lot of bedrock. If you go and look at like Savage Rapids Dam, and you look at Gold Hill, and you look downstream in the Hellgate Canyon, it's a lot of bedrock control. So once sediment starts to move in the reservoir, it shoots through here like a rocket. There have been experiments done on dam removals. Dam removal is a pretty common thing now. And so there have been a lot of experiments done. And what basically happens, this is an example of an experiment, a simulation using hydraulic modeling by a pretty well-known modeler, basically. You have this sediment that's collected behind the dam, and then you pull the dam. What happens is that sediment starts to slowly dissipate and disperse out until essentially you get down to your natural grade in the river. And so that's what we're expecting to see, and that's what the modeling has provided us, is that you see this blob of sediment, and it pulses through the system, but as you get further away from that sediment plug, it starts to disperse more and more. And so as you're over 5 miles downstream from the Old Ray Dam, things are dispersed out quite a bit. And it's not a big pulse of material that continues on through the Gold Hill area. I was going to talk about the dam removal plan. If you're interested, I can talk about that. Or if you have questions about the water intake, I can talk about that in more detail. So does anybody want to see the dam removal plan?
I would like to ask you 2 questions at this point then.
Okay.
First of all, if you're familiar with the study or the decided our
Yeah,
intake
the
of.
Bureau of Reclamation.
Okay, so my original question and the still question, did it factor in, when I get a copy of that document, which I'm going to try to get,
There it is, right
is
there.
it going to factor in the removal of Gold Ray Dam?
No.
No, thank you. The second is that this statement that I'm quoting says potential adverse condition impacts would include loss of water supply, not sediment. I mean, that's not the long term. And it says generally domestic use from downtake water, downstream water intakes. So that's really, see how I've got those 2 things connected? That you're going to take out the dam, are you going to change the course of the river?
So one of the
Or
things-
is it going to be in the water anymore?
So one of the things that's happening is during construction, we're constructing during the summer, deconstructing it during the summer, and when the dam is actually removed, there will be a couple of days where there's going to be a lot of sediment, fine sediment like sand and silt, in the water column. When you only have a flow of about 1,500 CFS, maybe 2,000 CFS in the river, there's a lot of sediment in that. And so if you're doing a domestic water intake on the Rogue River, like in Old Ray Estates, we have several of them, their filters could get plugged with fine sediment. This is not a long-term impact, though. It would be a short-term during the deconstruction phase this
How
summer.
do they get
See, in
cleaned
this
up?
report, it's specified long-term, short-term. Coho do the short-term impact we minimize, okay? And so, but this isn't saying it's a short-term. Potential adverse economic impacts would include the loss of water supply. The adverse economic impact that they're talking about here is that these people are going to have to buy water or something?
What are you reading from?
What am I reading, the Fonzie on
Okay,
page
yeah, all right, okay.
2?
Yeah, and what that's referring to is the short-term impacts immediately downstream from the dam, with the Gold Ray Estates folks. When the dam is actually breached, and the coffer dam is breached to where the river changed its course for a short term, for a short duration, a couple of days, there's going to be a fairly heavy silt load coming through that area that could impact them. And so that's really speaking to those domestic uses that are immediately downstream.
So
Because the benefits seem to be long-term, it doesn't say short-term, it says NMFS has identified social and economic impacts associated with the proposed project. Beneficial impacts that are interrelated with natural and physical environmental effects include long-term benefits to recreational fishing and commercial fishing guide services, and to recreational river use and commercial raft guide services. No new paragraph. Potential adverse economic impacts would include loss of water supply. So they've thrown in this minimal 25-minute inconvenience with the long-term benefits. This is what that means in this paragraph, because it, and then it says mitigation proposed to address these potential impacts include establishment of existing maintenance and operational requirements for water intakes and wells, and development of a management plan by Jackson County to address project-related impacts, if any, to those water intakes or wells. So I guess what I want to see is this management plan that you guys have.
That is a notification plan that we would notify all users downstream, which would include the city of Gold Hill and the city of Rogue River and the city of Grants Pass, so that we are going to have some turbidity in the water. At that point, it would be a good idea probably not to run your pumps.
At what point would you be notifying that? After it happens or?
No, before it happens. And it would be at least probably a week's notice at least. And we do have, the Rhode Valley Council of Governments has sent out to the public works directors, Gold Hill, Rogue River, Grants Pass, what is happening with the project. And so that's another way of notifying people when we start and stop construction work.
So what's gonna happen to the people downstream, not only us, but I'm worried too about the public. What happens if there's pumps and stuff do get slammed?
You lock one, after you lock one.
I mean, what's gonna happen to their pumps? Is the county gonna buy all new pumps? Are they gonna get some guy to go down there and unclog them all for them? Or is it just, you're on your own to do what you need to do, but we ain't gonna help you?
Well, we have, first of all, we've had a specific meeting with that group, the Gold Ray Estates 1 and 2, attended a meeting. They have access to the county staff and myself and the project team, basically. We have been meeting with them on a regular basis, individually with the landowners. We have been documenting their existing conditions and how they currently operate their pumps and intakes. The majority of the intakes are irrigation, and so they're not domestic use for
No, but
drinking.
nonetheless important.
Right. And so what we have asked them is, and said what we would do is notify them when we're going to be having some turbidity releases that are above normal, basically. And so, and at that point, it would be a good idea probably to not use your pump. And these are typically going to be, this should be like a 2 to 3 day period is what we're expecting.
So if they ran their pump in that 2 or 3 day period, let's just say they have a fire up there and they've got to pull some irrigation water. So then is it too bad, so sad for them, fix it yourself, or is the county going to be helpful, or?
We're gonna deal with those on a case-by-case basis.
So you have no plan?
But basically what we've said to them,
Wait, answer the question. So you have no plan?
we have, as Scott's explained, we've gone and met with them, we've mapped them, we understand what's there, and
That wasn't my question.
and I'm trying
You
to,
have no plan to help those people. If, let's say, a fire, God forbid, but I've seen it happen up there, what happens if someone goes to work on Monday and they turn the pumps on and they're at work till, 12 hours, whatever, and stuff comes down to what? I'm wanting to know a full plan of what you're gonna do when stuff happens.
So we have a communication plan, and the idea behind that, and this isn't something that just happened yesterday. This is an effort that started way back in the beginning of the year. So in March, I believe March 26th, we had a public meeting that anybody could attend, and many landowners did. And we met specifically with the downstream landowners afterwards and described in detail the construction process and what the likely impacts would be. And at that time, we notified them that we would notify them when they were going to take place. We have a schedule that is on the RVCOG website that talks about and gets updated basically weekly on what the construction is going to be. So anybody that lives there.
But you're not answering my question. My
Yeah,
question is,
Why didn't we get,
wait,
why didn't we
please.
get this?
So if, I'm just trying to get one answer. If there is a problem with downstream pumps, there will be no help from the county with it. For repairs,
would you like me to answer the questions? I've tried several times.
I tried to listen several times, and
Okay,
I'm not getting an answer.
Okay, let me finish. We have a communication plan We're letting them know it's going to be handled on a case-by-case basis. And what we've said is the expectation is these are folks that are used to dealing with a river that gets silted in, it's cloudy, it's muddy. And we've been very clear with them that things that we would consider, and they would, and there might be some level of conversation, but normal and routine events is their responsibility. They plug their filters today. During the winter, their intakes will plug when the river gets really cloudy.
You know, because they take them out in the winter, but yeah.
Or they stop pumping. Actually, typically they just stop pumping for a while. And so for those normal and routine events, they're on their own to do that.
Well, the dam removal is not normal and routine.
Something beyond a normal and routine event that we're going to work with them on a case-by-case basis. And so we're measuring turbidity levels. We're measuring what's in the river, and what's going in front of their home is the same as what's goes in front of their home in the wintertime, then they're going to have to take care of that themselves. If the slug is set up and it's moving through immediately before or after the copper dam is breached, is higher, and then we'll work with them on a case-by-case basis.
But you have no plan in place. Is there money in contingency?
Yes.
How much money is in contingency?
I have right now scheduled about $35,000 in contingencies.
And how many downstream people? Household?
Well, there's a, if you're talking about irrigation or if you're talking about domestic use. Domestic, there's about 30.
30?
Is a
Last
rough,
house?
is
Are we one of the 30?
an estimate, no.
There's about 30.
But we're not.
And there's 1,000 people here that are dependent on that intake, and you've been meeting with these people in Gold Ray separately, and there's 1,000 people here, we've had not one meeting with anybody.
The difference
We
is,
can read a newsletter.
the difference is, the people immediately downstream of the dam are going to be fairly heavily impacted for a short duration when the dam is breached. 5 miles down the stream, we are not anticipating a level of impact that's different than a winter storm. It's the level of impact that you are used to dealing with right now. Your plant operators are very familiar on how to deal with that. We're not anticipating anything worse than that for your facility. Immediately downstream of the dam, within a few thousand yards, yes, they'll be impacted much heavier. 5 miles down the stream, we are not anticipating a heavy impact to the city of Phillips Hill.
You aren't anticipating, but it's our obligation to anticipate, and to make sure that we're covered. And I'm being told that the study that was from the Bureau of Reclamation didn't, when they cited our intake, did not take into consideration the removal of the gold rate. So that's significant.
Wait, hold on. That's irrelevant. The removal of the Gold Ray Dam. If you went back to the Bureau of Reclamation and said, and I know the hydraulic engineers that did it in Denver, Colorado, if you went back to them and said, hey, you guys did this in September of 2001 to cite our water intake, they're going to remove the Gold Ray Dam. Would you reevaluate your citing of the intake? They would come back to you and say, no, it's cited in the right location, in the best locations possible. End of story.
Will the county indemnify us then? In writing?
No.
That you want, here we got it. And then, this
Well, that
is
doesn't make any sense.
well, loss of water means, loss of a water supply means something to me.
Okay,
You know,
I don't know how to state this more clearly than to say, we do not anticipate any impact to the city of Gold Hill beyond a normal winter event. We don't expect your intake to be silted in and covered by debris, nowhere near that. We don't expect the level of impact of the people downstream of the Gold Ray Estates. The water's going to get cloudy for a few days. That's all the impact that we anticipate happening here, and that's been through the hydraulic analysis and the studies.
But you have to understand that we have to be on the lookout for our citizens. It's going to take us more chemical, more of everything for those few days. I know you say it's only a few days, but I've come to realize after living here my whole life, it isn't always what it seems when you talk about that river.
Right.
Anticipate is a very
So-
big word. It's not-
Yeah,
Right.
and when I'm told that, you're not anticipating, but yet you have 35,000 in contingency, it means that you think maybe there might be, but you're not sure. And I've come to
But
the
here's-
conclusion
is
that
this for the,
I don't trust any of those models.
But
And that's
here's-
just me.
And
I don't-
I'll be the first one as a professional engineer in water resources and hydraulic engineering. I will be the first one to say that I would not hang my hat on every model that's being put out for sediment studies. It's probably one of the hardest things to predict that there is.
Absolutely.
No question about it. That's why I made it very clear that we look for trends and trajectories. Kind of where is it going from here? And it's very clear to us, based on the modeling that we did, that you have a lot of bedrock in the river between Gold Ray Dam and here, and sediment does not hang out on bedrock very easily. It will likely get washed through here and continue down.
And I appreciate the studies that you brought, but I have a hard time. I've been here my whole life. Some of the biggest fish runs ever been recorded have been recorded. Personally, I think it's a load of crap. But that's just my personal input. I think it's just a way to spend some money. That's just me.
Well, it says here, I mean, even the National Marine Fisheries, okay, I'm on page 3 now, identified several effects of the human environment that are uncertain. Of note, effects of the proposed action of existing legal surface water intakes downstream of Gold Ray Dam and several legal wells upstream of Gold Ray Dam may be affected by the proposed action. However, expects the proposed mitigation measures address the uncertainty associated with the potential effects on water intakes and wells. Water intakes may be affected by sediment transport following the dam removal. However, sediment transport is currently occurring. Years. Recent experience with Savage Rapids Dam project indicates that some downstream intakes could be affected by sediments from behind the dam being transported downstream. I've noticed that not only have there been, I don't know how they were affected by sediment, but it appears to me that there's a huge draw stretch between where the river is and where it used to be. There's docks sitting there in midair. And then, you don't touch the river anymore. And I don't know, I mean, that's what I'm...
So I'm not sure what you're talking about.
I'm still talking about the same thing, do you know whether or not our intake is still going to be underwater when we do this? Because I don't see it being mentioned anywhere here. All I see is...
It's not specifically mentioned because we do not believe it's going to be impacted.
So I will go back again. If I could just...
Expects the proposed mitigation measures address the uncertainty associated with the potential effects of water intakes and wells. So that's why we're here, because we're uncertain and we don't see anybody telling us that, hey, don't worry. I know that 5 years ago we made you build that intake when we were rearranging the river and taking out dams. But if you don't have any water, we'll be out here with $250,000 and replace your intake. I guess that's what I want to see. I want, because if that's how we're adversely affected, I think that we need to find out whether or not the council
I can tell you
says.
that you're not going to see that. And I can also tell you
We're going to see what?
the $250,000 or any other figure that you're throwing out there. So then the second thing is that if, again, I'm going to pull this out because the Bureau of Reclamation studied this in detail, and it does not matter if Gold Ray Dam is going out or not. They studied and came up with alternatives of where the best locations for the water intake should be. Gold Ray Dam has no impact on that whatsoever. So we're not here to, we can't debate the water intake. It is where it is. It was developed in the best possible place. It was put in before the Gold Hill Dam was taken out. So there was a lot of concern on what about when the dam comes out, how is that going to impact? It came out, there have been no impacts.
But they knew that it was coming out.
Right.
And if it was written in the study, then we would figure that we could go and talk to them about it. Because right now, Johnny Cat's coming to us and talking about but right now we're having to answer for all those things with,
right.
We're having to answer for it.
But that's construction.
Nobody else is. Well, I know, but all we did was said okay to everything.
It has nothing to do with the siting of the water intake or the operation of the water intake.
It actually did have something to do with it. We will have to do with the engineering study. Okay, it has to do with it.
You just stated that it would have no adverse effects on Gold Hill, and if you have to change the water intake, and that's a big time.
Absolutely. I agree. If you had to change the water intake.
That's the point we're trying to make.
I agree. If you had to change the water intake, that would be a very adverse effect, and it'd be a very significant impact. But then it comes back to, did the Bureau of Reclamation do a good job on their study for locating their water intake? Has nothing to do with the goal rate limit.
Then Gold Hill's screwed, no matter what.
Well, but you're using that study, you know, so if you're using that study to say that that's in a great place, but if it isn't, then it'll be their fault, because that study isn't that great.
That's absolutely right.
Oh,
So that's what
okay,
we'll
well,
do.
that's all I need to hear now. I just want to talk to the attorney.
There's no indication that that's necessary at this point at all, based on the studies that have been done. I mean,
They just
looking at
study it.
Worst case scenario, I don't think it wasn't looked at specifically because there was no indication that there would be an impact.
That's correct.
My gathering from reading all of this.
Yep, that's correct.
If there was an indication there would be an impact, it would have been studied in quite great depth, and they would have looked at all kinds of alternative avenues.
Right.
Well, for example, I mean, when we did study it, the Gold Ray Estates focused downstream will be impacted.
Yes.
For a short term and for a short time, and so, you know, we are meeting with them, discussing with them, and have a plan to deal with that. But there's no indication that Gold Hill's gonna see that level of impact at all.
Then there should be no problem having that in writing somewhere, Margaret, because that's how.
That's what
It
there is.
is
That's
in
how-
writing, it's called the environmental assessment, it's called the FONSI, or the findings of no significant impacts.
Mhm.
That's in writing.
So
That's
if
the
you're,
official document that looks at environmental, social, and economical
So
impacts.
let's just say after that something did happen. Always the best, let's do it.
it's mentioned here.
So let's just say it does happen.
Okay?
So who's responsible to us?
I'm sure the attorneys would figure that out.
Is it,
Why do you have to go that far?
Who's cost?
yeah, I mean, we are on a stream here.
I know that.
That's why I'm concerned about every extra bit of chemical we have to put in our water. I'm looking for all of that. So what I'm saying is, let's just say it does happen. Hope it doesn't. I really hope it doesn't.
Right.
Let's just say it does.
And so when you say it happened, what is it?
Adversely affects our
Tell me
system.
what an adverse effect is.
Let's just say we're packed around our intake
So you have fine sediments like sand around your intake?
and we're clogged. Let's
and you
say we're
can't-
clogged.
And you can't draw water from the river?
Let's go there.
Okay. Okay.
So who's responsible? Is it the people that wrote this study?
Well, I believe the Bureau of Reclamation said there would be some potential maintenance required.
No,
Yes.
clogging isn't a maintenance. Clogging is
Well,
not.
no, that is, that's exactly.
From
what
when
the
you jumped
problem
it up above and you
was.
made it stir up and then it came down and got us, that is not a natural.
No,
occurrence.
if you change the course, if you have a different, whatever topography is called when it's under the water, than the plant was designed for because the river has been changed. So the operation and maintenance was something that we looked at. I mean, that, of course it was. You know, and we knew that it was different than the original one, you know,
We
the
just looked
original
at better water
intake.
because
So if you
it's
change
cheaper.
it, then there definitely could be, you know, you've got a plant that is designed for one set of criteria, and the criteria is being changed. Perhaps, you know, and
If their studies are incorrect.
they didn't, but I just was reading in her studies, they said that they will look, that these are some of the potential adverse effects on water intakes downstream. You
I
know,
want to show you
it doesn't
one
say
thing
short
here.
term, and it doesn't say where this effect ends.
You guys are all familiar with the water intake, obviously.
Mhm.
The water intake being right here. This is actually during deconstruction of the Little Dam. This is bedrock, and if you go out there and look at the intake today, there's a lot of bedrock around it, right? Okay, sediment is not able to collect and sit around with bedrock. So what happens, and that's exactly why the Bureau of Reclamation cited this right here. They didn't put it down here or further up, they didn't put it down here because it was too shallow. They put it here because it was deep. They didn't put it further up because it was more expensive to run pipe and everything further down. So there was a happy balance to get the proper depth, the proper cleansing or sweeping velocities to scour out the sediment, and economically feasible for the project for long term. And so this rock here, the bedrock, is about, you've got about the best scenario you could ever ask for a water intake.
right
This is
now.
very rare.
Right now, we do.
You will in the future. This is extremely rare to have such a good water
That's why
intake.
we're worried.
If you want to see a bad one, go to the city of Corvallis and ask them how much they spend on the Willamette River trying to get water out of that. And I can show you a lot of water intakes around the state for cities that are a lot bigger than yours that have problems every year.
But you have to understand, we have some of the highest water rates there are. I mean,
Is that a result of?
We need nothing, well, no, I'm not blaming that.
Okay.
But we as counselors need to rest assured that we are adding no more expense for our citizens.
On page 3, the very last paragraph, it says, for the downstream water intakes prior to dam removal, Jackson County will complete this assessment of each individual pump location for permitted points of diversion. If adverse effects to intakes occur, such as a result of dam removal, Jackson County will continue to coordinate with landowners to determine the appropriate solution on a site-by-site basis, which is what you're talking about. So did we get one of these? Did we get an assessment?
No.
Because if there was a written assessment that said,
That's been asked and answered, and I think
what, this,
as to why the county focused on individuals directly downstream.
that's not my
as opposed
question,
to the
Elise.
city.
My question is that if we have this written assessment, that would shift the burden from the Bureau of Reclamation study to the county, right?
Well, that's a,
But then, it's not gonna happen, so why can't we get one?
you're asking for, legal interpretation. The reason you didn't get a written assessment is because you stopped at the point that we believe that people were going to be impacted. We do not believe that the Gold Hill site is going to be impacted, and so we stopped. So
Right.
that's why we didn't come down here and do that.
I hear you. I mean, I can hear that that's what you're saying, and that would be our hope that that was true. But we are an intake, and we are 1,000 people, and I don't think it's unreasonable. The council may not believe that that's an unreasonable request to get one of these.
City of Rogue River is an intake, and the city of Grants Pass is an intake as well.
Grants,
Where do we stop?
Grants Pass Irrigation District has
You just stop with us, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Because- But I don't know if I'm happy with you stopping before us.
Now, we're the closest affected area anyway. So, that's all
The
right.
question is, the modeling that we're all talking about, Andrew, is this the same form or type of modeling that was used in the Savage Rapids dam removal?
Yeah, so there's basically the standard modeling is called HECRAS. It's just a model that's put out by the Army Corps of Engineers, Hydrologic Engineering Center. And it's a one-dimensional model. And they actually used, on the Savage Rapids, they used both HECRAS, which is one-dimensional, and they used a 2D proprietary model called G-STARS that the Bureau of Reclamation created. And so it's an internal model that they utilize. On the Gold Hill Dam, they used HECRAS, and then on Gold Ray, we used HECRAS as well.
So all the problems they have right now with post-removal of the Savage Rapids, was that all in their model?
So when you say problems, maybe if you could identify what you're talking about specifically, that
The
would be
plugging of their irrigation system?
okay. So there was a concrete head wall and water intakes designed just downstream of the dam. One of the things that the fisheries and the agencies wanted was the sediment behind the dam. Rather than having it excavated out, they wanted to leave it in the river and let it go down on its own. They did the modeling and identified, Bureau of Reclamation did the modeling, and identified that it would not be a problem to let it go downstream. It would fill in the city of Grants Pass's water intake, things like that. What happened was all of this very loose and smaller gravel was along the Rogue River upstream of the Savage Rapids. We did not, in the last year, get any big events like a typical one-year flooding. It was a very low water year. And so it only got to about 10 to 15,000 CFS, which was just enough to mobilize a bunch of very small particles, small gravels, and they all deposited in front of the water intake. Slade Construction Group was brought back in by the Bureau of Reclamation to clean that out. We did that, and then under this last event we had in June, the water intake's working perfectly. And so what happened is we had kind of the worst case scenario where we had just enough flow to get the sediment moved a little bit, but not continue it through the system. And so that plug, like I was showing you, that big slug of material just kind of moved about 200 yards or so downstream right in front of the intakes. But now that we've gotten another flushing event, so to speak, it's actually performing pretty well.
And to answer your question, it's the same model that was used on Savage Rapids with the problems are, yeah, it's the same model.
Yeah.
But what happened was exactly what was predicted. Nobody thought that would happen. You know, where we had a winter with almost no flow in the river. As soon as they got flow, then it swept downstream. Everything's fine now. You don't hear about Grand Rapids Irrigation District having problems this summer. That problem's been solved.
And so the question is, could that happen with Gold Hill? And the answer is no. The reason I say that is because the intake for the Grand Rapids Irrigation District is just a few hundred yards downstream from all the sediment. The intake at Gold Hill is several miles downstream. And as I showed you on that clip there, that exhibit, is that sediment slug, it could move a little bit downstream, but as it gets further, it starts to disperse more and more.
Any questions, council?
I have one question that was a little bit earlier on. Was it, when the county did all their research, was there ever was this ever, the restoration of the dam ever presented as a potential for funding for alternative renewable energy? Or was it always just presented, I mean, was it ever packaged and researched
For a hydropower?
as a,
Yeah, absolutely. So there's,
with the funding coming from green renewable resources rather than?
yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background on that, on the hydropower generation. There's actually a private company that makes money by going and retrofitting existing dams with hydropower. And they are actually working on the Applegate Dam right now in joint venture with the Army Corps of Engineers. The company is called Symbiotics out of Portland. They have other offices. They looked at the Savage Rapids Dam and the Gold Ray Dam, and they did not pursue hydropower on either one of them. And due to the issues that were there, not enough money into it, it doesn't financially pencil out, and environmentally was probably insurmountable as far as what would have to happen. There's currently a law that does not really allow water to be diverted for hydropower right now at the Gold Ray area. And you're also required to maintain, I believe, 1,400 CFS in the river at all times in the Gold Ray area, which would deem hydropower useless during the summer months, essentially. And so the costs that we came up with for generating hydropower were in the range of $69 million to go in and retrofit and put in a new power plant. And the return on that was about $1.5 million per year, which does not pencil out if you're an investor or the county.
That's what the 59 million is, because I always have 15.9 million.
That was just for the structural dam repairs.
15.9 billion was not adding hydropower. Adding hydropower increased the cost up to 69 million.
So the Board of Commissioners asked that question, and so it was looked at in detail. And an outside company with no interest whatsoever in dam removal, but rather money, looked at the project as well and determined that it was not something to be pursued.
Maybe you can really address the issues that are out of the public and questions with phrases that have been mentioned about the historical value and whether or not all the processes have been fully
Yeah, absolutely.
gone through as far as permits.
Sure.
Yeah, appellants have argued and that not all the permits have been done and that not everything has been done according to legal processes. We have letters from the Army Corps of Engineers that says we're fine. We have a letter from the Division of State Lands that says we're fine. We have letters from NIMS that says we're fine. The appellants have appealed the decision by the board. That went to LUBA, Land Use Board of Appeals. They were overruled. They appealed the floodplain permit. The hearings officer found in favor of the county. And the third one is from the U.S. District Court, and Judge Banner hasn't ruled yet. But there's lots of allegations made that we did not do things properly and the permits not have been obtained. And bottom line is the courts have not supported that, and the regulatory agencies who have the responsibility to enforce those things have not supported that allegation.
And
As far as the powerhouse itself, a study was done on that during the project, and it is eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. The powerhouse and the dam facility itself is, and what that does is then kick off a lengthy process where we work with the State Historic Preservation Office. We went through that process with the State Historic Preservation Office and agreed to mitigation on how to replace some of the elements of that in an interpretive site. And the State Historic Preservation Office has signed off on that and said that is an adequate treatment in this case.
The other thing too is the Jackson County Historical Society discussed the project as well, and they, my understanding, the way that they did not have funding or the capacity to do anything with that structure anyway, and so they were not interested in obtaining that for historic preservation.
But a piece of it recently torn down. Was a piece of the powerhouse recently torn down?
Yes.
What's the mitigation?
It's an interpretive site above the existing dam site on the side of the hill where an old lodge was located that was part of this project. It's a foundation there, and a turbine from the dam will be located there, a generator will be located there, as well as some interpretive panels showing drawings and how the whole site worked.
We also have the Historical Society representative, I believe, is filming and documenting parts and pieces of the turbines as they come out and panels and different parts of the existing structure. And so we're working as much as possible with them to make sure that it gets documented. George Kramer, who's the historic preservationist who lives in Ashland and is actually was at one time on the governor's historic preservation team, is the one that was responsible for dealing with that preservation and plan for preservation of the historic significance of the structure.
What about the fish county?
The Fish County, there's no historic significance for that other than the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Sorry.
I agree.
Sorry.
So they are anticipating likely keeping the door in.
The door.
Yeah.
Oh, boy, that's
I haven't seen any pictures lately. I mean, for a long time, our kids actually went out there on field trips and watched the fish go through
Sure.
that. I guess that is a
Anything further, council? Council satisfied with the?
already done, the council can
Any
act.
public input? If so, please step up and podium, state your name and address.
My name's Ron Gallagher, I live on Old State Road. And you're talking about the build-up behind the dam and how it's been tested, and there's nothing really there to be afraid of. But I ran a gold dredge 2 or 3 miles down from the dam in the 80s, and we would take the fines out of the sluice box and put it in 5-gallon buckets and run it home and keep dredging, because if we stop dredging, other guys were getting all the go. Now we'd come back and we would either use a gold pan, or in our case we used a gold genie to run the fines out and get the gold, and if we didn't do it within 7 to 10 days, it smelled like a septic tank. So I know, man, that dam's not clean. That's just, I know. Is there any explanation on that?
Yeah, so there's a very specific protocol that the Army Corps of Engineers requires before you can get a permit to remove a dam. And you have to sample according to their requirements and come up with a sampling plan that is reviewed by them, the Army Corps. And they send it out to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the EPA, DEQ, other agencies. They agree upon a plan for sampling the sediment behind the dam. This was done on the Savage Rapids Dam, it was done on the Gold Hill Dam as well, and it was done on the Gold Ray. There were no findings on the Savage Rapids, there was no findings on the Gold Hill of any heavy metals above typical levels that you would find in a river like this. And the same thing was found on the Gold Ray Reservoir. And so the standard protocol that was developed was applied with coring, so they actually go out on a boat and drill down through the sediment until they can't drill any further, and down to basically either bedrock or refusal, bring up that core, and then test that for the material in the lab. And that was done by Southern Oregon University and HDR.
Well, I still have my doubts on it because we did a lot of samples on the river, and it was quite extensive everywhere. And also we found mercury and stuff like that in the water.
So there should be a ton of mercury
So,
here after all the.
I'm sure that, especially with all the mining that went on at Bear Creek and all those places up in there, that there's got to be quite a bit of chemical. And we know what came out of Bear Creek over the years as far as sewage goes. And another question I had is, you guys are talking about impact on the wetlands, and I read a couple articles where a lot of the rulings are exempt because they're a fish improvement project. Well, that's not true. It may be a species improvement, but it sure as hell ain't gonna improve those warmwater fish up there above the dam. They're gonna die.
That's correct.
And nobody's addressed that.
And they're not necessarily.
Fish and game can't even, Fish and Wildlife can't even give you a list of what's there. In fact, they asked me. They're not aware that there's catfish in the river. I mean, channel cat. There's big catfish in the river.
So one of the things that the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the National Marine Fisheries Service had to do in this process is that they had to approve a fish salvage plan that we put together. And all of the bass and crappie and everything else that's in there, catfish, whatever you find, we are going to do our best to salvage, and they will take and move to another site, to some ponds
We're
elsewhere.
gonna do that prior to breaching the dam?
Absolutely, yep.
Because I noticed you're only about 10 feet from now.
No, so what we have is a very specific plan that's been approved by the different agencies that isolates pieces of the dam. We take the fish out, anything that's in there, whether it's a native or non-native, they all get treated the same basically, and removed, and the native fish get put back in the river, the non-native get taken to a pond or somewhere else by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Then the dam would be removed, the water drawn down, we would de-fish the area again, and then the rest of the dam would be taken out of the river to be able to return back to the normal course.
How long is that gonna take?
The transition from from reservoir to free-flowing river is about 1 week, but that's after we've taken half the dam out. And so we would take the half that's being isolated right now that you can see.
Right.
The plan is, or in a perfect world, I guess, the coffer dam would be completed, that portion of the dam taken out and de-fished, and then the river would be returned to that area. Then we would take out the other half of the river.
So I know there's a lot of species of wildlife up there.
There are, yes.
And they can't even tell you, what's there. They don't know.
It was like going to a new world when you
It
went
was,
to that
you
slip.
bet.
Right.
And it's a perfect place.
Mhm.
It all governs itself, gets along, doesn't need man.
Right.
And now we're gonna take this waste.
Did you say that the standards are changed if it's a fish for the toxic,
No.
No.
if it's a fish restoration
You
project?
said for a wetland impacts or potential mitigation required, it is different for a restoration project.
And also the floodplain permit is different for restoration project, or fishing easement project.
Just health, you expect to have stuff, what's the health risk? Long-term risks of dam failure would be evaded, demolition activities will pose a short-term risk to public safety, and those concerns should be addressed by following a site-specific health and safety plan, closing the river for a distance upstream and downstream of the dam during and for a period after the dam is removed. Sediments behind the dam that would be transported downstream have been tested and do not pose human health concerns. That's so strange, I've never seen this.
It's a public document that's available on the RV-COG website. All of the documents are on the website.
How did that go, how did it be such a clean pile of sediment? Nobody knows how that sediment can be so unclean.
There's a standard protocol that was followed.
If
The
I took a
results
bucket
are
of
the
that-
results. We don't make up results.
If I took a tank truck full of that stuff, would I need a permit to dump it in the river, or is this just so clean?
Absolutely, because you'd be filling in a waterway. So yes, you would need a floodplain permit, you would need a DSL and an Army Corps permit.
Put it in the house now?
No. That's the whole purpose of the sediment evaluation study, is to determine if the sediment can be removed or let naturally down the river.
Nobody that lives around here understands why that sediment's in here. Nobody that I know that worked in the mills, nobody that's been in those mill ponds that are behind the mills.
I'm mainly concerned about the mercury.
Yeah,
from the-
you know,
from
I-
mining.
Well, like it's been said, we follow the standard protocols, they found nothing in there. What I would add is the same concerns were expressed when your dam was removed. That issue came up when your dam was removed, and they found no indications that that was a problem.
But I didn't think we had sediment.
The same concerns were expressed when the Savage Rapids dam was removed, and they have not found any elevated levels of toxins downstream.
But that has, what did you say, 20 to 30 feet of sediment?
In areas,
20 to
yeah.
30 feet?
But I guess, Christine, the point is that everybody, including, we've gone through several appeals already. And so it's not like we're doing this in a vacuum. There are standard procedures that are applied throughout the United States, not just here on the Rogue River. And we have followed those procedures, and yet people will come back and say, like yourself, there's contamination or there's bad sediment, but you have nothing to document or prove that.
No, I didn't say that. What I thought that he said something about the standards being changed if it was a fish restoration project, because I do notice in this, that it says, yes, the initial effects are gonna be negative, and then they're gonna get better later.